Hello, everyone! Well, we finally made it! The last episode of our Waterfront Living Guide. It's hard to believe that we've been through 7 episodes of informative visits by our friends who've taught us all about low-impact living on our lakefront properties. You're just a few minutes away from owning your own On the Living Edge book. Today, we're going to be talking about our final topic of the series, whose shoreline is it anyway? Before leaving you all, I really want everyone to know about the legal intricacies that go into lakefront living. These include the question of who truly owns the shoreline. The answer might even surprise you. As mentioned before, shoreline property owners have ownership over all the area that extends from inland to the natural boundary, as long as no municipal reserve exists along the shoreline. What is the natural boundary, you may ask? It is just another word for the ordinary high water mark, or, specifically to Alberta, the legal bank. This ordinary high water mark is identified by land surveyors. They use historical data in the form of records, maps, vegetation, and even geological characteristics to identify the natural boundary. A lakefront owner doesn't own the land below this natural boundary, as this is owned by the provincial government. Due to this legality, lakefront owners are rarely allowed to block off their shoreline from public access by fencing or other barriers, as this will technically be trespassing or encroachment. Since the land below the natural boundary is owned by the Crown, it is public land. In the case of shorelines and water bodies in Alberta, management is split between several levels of government, as well as private owners. The municipality manages all public land inland of the natural boundary. Municipal land along shorelines is usually taken as reserve land during subdivision in order to protect the water body. Private landowners, whose property is not cut off from the water body by reserve land, only own the land inland of the natural boundary. This is because the provincial government owns the bed and shore of the water body, or all the land up to the natural boundary. This means most of the regulation for activities occurring on the bed and shore, such as installing a floating dock or removing aquatic vegetation, falls to the provincial government. Finally, when it comes to the actual water, the jurisdiction is shared between the provincial and federal government. Acts such as the Public Lands Act and the Water Act give the provincial government most of the ownership and regulatory authority to manage the lake, while the Fisheries Act and the Navigation Protection Act give the federal government the right to regulate lake use in order to protect fish habitat and navigation. So, for example, if you are concerned about boat speeds on your lake, you would need to speak to the federal government. That being said, waterfront owners do have some special rights over the water body they border that other lake property owners and backlot owners don't have. Firstly, they have a right to access to and from the water at any point along their waterfront property. This, however, does not guarantee them a right to place a dock on public land for mooring boats. Secondly, they have the right to protect their property from erosion. You are legally entitled to build any erosion countermeasures on your own land, which is always land above the natural boundary. Even so, approval from various agencies is often required, as erosion control structures often need to modify the shoreline to be functional, and the shoreline is owned by the Crown. There may also be timing restrictions on this type of construction due to fish spawning and bird nesting. Thirdly, they have the right to add additional areas of land to their parcel if a lake permanently recedes and a new boundary forms. Sometimes, erosion forces on other shores may wash up sediment and soil on your land. Over many years, this may build up to become accrued land. You can have a land surveyor confirm that this land wasn't deposited unnaturally, and you may seek to gain legal possession over it. To amend your title, you will need to get the Crown's consent for the new boundary, as they are always the adjacent owners that share the boundary. Now, a lot of you must be wondering, what if I want to build something on my lakefront? Am I allowed to do so even though it technically isn't considered my property? Well, that's a really good question. A lot of shoreline property owners have never heard of the Public Lands Act and its requirements. This provincial law allows for authorizations, approvals, and formal dispositions to be issued by Alberta Environment and Parks to individuals or local entities who wish to carry out shoreline projects below the natural boundary. This means that if you have sufficient reason to build a temporary or permanent structure, erosion project work, power line, pipeline, or any other construction project, you may be able to receive authorization to make use of the public land. This only works if you own the property directly upland of the shoreline. Since shorelines are considered environmentally significant areas, Alberta Environment and Parks conduct an extensive review process to ensure that your shoreline project has a minimal impact on the health of the shore. Another important piece of legislation that every shoreline property owner should be familiar with is the Federal Fisheries Act. This act provides the federal government the power to take action against damage to fish habitat. Due to the Fisheries Act having a large amount of legislative strength, there can be some hefty fines and penalties to those who break it. As a shorefront property owner myself, I found that the best way to conduct a shoreline project is to receive a written letter of advice from the Department of Fisheries and Oceans Canada, the DFO, or a written authorization under the Public Lands Act and Water Act from Alberta Environment and Parks that outlines terms and conditions which, if followed, make it unlikely for any damage to fish habitat or injury to the bed and shore of the lake. For all of you who have made it to the end of our waterfront living guide, it is now clear that we shoreline property owners have a shared stewardship responsibility to protect sensitive shoreline areas. While we enjoy a beautiful lake view, plenty of natural wildlife, and an amazing forest scenery, we have a duty to protect our home. One of the many rewards of shoreline property protection will always be an eye-catching home with an awe-dropping property value. Thank you so much for joining me on my lakefront adventures, and I hope I've helped you understand a little more about what goes into waterfront living. We have just one last quiz, and then the contact information you entered at the beginning will be forwarded to Parkland County, where they will use it to send you your very own On the Living Edge book. I hope you use it well, and I look forward to seeing you all on the lake this summer. Goodbye, friends!